Thank you for the enthusiastic applause, Chad. Welcome to the first afternoon, well, I guess it's the second afternoon session, so welcome. So I've been at VMware for almost 8 years now, and I've been in EUC for virtually the entire time, no pun intended. My job right now in tech marketing I really enjoy it because I get to pick apart new products before they ship. So like I spent a couple of weeks on instant clones alone, just kind of understanding it. It's also the most frustrating part of my job because sometimes when I get the new code, it's a little rough around the edges. So I got to kind of figure things out. So that's kind of cool. So what I'm going to do today is talk about instant clones, which will be part of Horizon 7. It's also going to be part of Horizon Air hybrid mode that we talked about this morning. Little different implementations, but same kind of effect in terms of the way you build pools. I'm going to talk specifically today about how it works with Horizon 7. How many of you guys are familiar with linked clones, Composer linked clones? So a good bit of the room, and using those probably for a while. These are going to be different. So I'm going to talk about some of the similarities, some of the differences, and kind of walk you through some technical concepts. This hasn't shipped yet, so things could change. Honestly, it's pretty solid at this point. Horizon 7 is going to ship very quickly now. So I'll just get into it. We'll do an overview first to kind of talk about why we did this, what the point of instant clones is. So you guys are probably pretty familiar with some of the trade-offs between persistent desktops and the non-persistent desktops, the ability to, especially with persistent desktops, to do things like user-installed applications and kind of manage them maybe more like a physical desktop than a non-physical desktop. The problems with non-persistent desktops is, well, they're non-persistent. We have to go through some, gyrations to get the user experience to be the same. So what we wanted to do is kind of bring some of that together into one place with this concept of a just-in-time desktop, the ability to fire up a desktop really quick. And you guys, if you've been around for a while, we announced this at VMworld in 2014 as, I think, Project Fargo, Project Meteor. We were calling it NGVC was what our internal name was for it while we were developing it. Next Generation View Composer, catchy. So you might have heard some of those different names, but what we're calling it as coming to market is instant clones. And instant clones are kind of part of the engine behind a just-in-time desktop, along with app volumes and user environment manager. So just an overview here of instant clones. You have to use vSphere 6, update 1 and above. I did all my testing on update 2. It's basically using this VM fork technology that we have. So I've got a running VM, and we'll get into how that looks technically, but there's a running VM, and off of that running VM, I fork other VMs. So I can create, 100 VMs. The actual VM gets created in really under a second, but to get it to the point where it goes through firing itself up, going through the customization process, and showing as available in Horizon takes somewhere between 4 and 5 seconds per desktop. So it's really quick, a lot quicker certainly than spinning up a new linked clone. So that helps us with the just-in-time thing. So I can now provision pools a little more elastically potentially, because maybe I don't have to have all the VMs running. I just have a minimum a set of spares, and then have them fire up just in time. We can do persistence. So you'll see here as I talk about this, we're only doing floating pools right now. So we're not doing dedicated pool types, but floating pool types. But I can still make the user experience persistent, right? I've got app volumes, I've got user environment manager, I've got folder redirection. I got a couple different mechanisms that I can use to make sure that when I log in as a user, I get my stuff. So one of the things that this really helps with is rolling upgrades. Because once I create a new image and publish that image to be available, the downtime for a user in a pool is really very minimal. In fact, it's almost nothing, especially since it's a floating pool. If I can, crank up 20 desktops in 5 seconds, I'm going to have desktops available for the user. So once I get my image published, and I'll talk about what I mean by that, I'm ready to roll pretty quickly. So it makes patching really simple. And then once I switch over the image, even if I'm a user and I haven't logged out yet, Once I log out, I'm going to get that desktop deleted, and the new desktop is going to get spun up off the new image. So I've always got the latest and greatest. So it really is pretty slick the way it works. So again, the concept here is just in time. I can spin up the desktops, I can attach those app stacks, I can attach customizations through User Environment Manager and have that user experience be ready to go very quickly for my users. So let's get into some of the technical overview around this. So as I said, we're doing floating desktop VDI pools only. So we're not going to do RDSH farms or anything like that right now, but VDI desktops and only a floating pool. There's a new guest customization process. So we've been using sysprep, we've been using quick prep with link clones, which you're probably familiar with. Now we have clone prep. Clone prep is what we use to customize these desktops. And the nice thing about clone prep is no power operations required. It just happens. So I don't have to go through those kind of 2 reboots that I do with a link clone. Again, that speeds up the process. We've tested up to 2,000 desktops per pool, which you don't want a pool bigger than that. We don't really support a pool bigger than that. You can have multiple pools, of course. App volumes, app stack, and writable volumes are supported, as I kind of talked about here with just-in-time desktop. And I can also provision all the desktops up front, or I can take a more elastic approach to it and provision them literally just in time, the desktops themselves. So I've got some flexibility there because we actually can create those desktops just in time. Kind of a little side-by-side between link clones and instant clones. I'll call out a few things here. The biggest thing is there's no separate service and there's no database. Okay, so that when you install instant clones, you just install the broker. You install the Horizon 7 broker, it goes in, there's nothing to check, you don't even know what's happening. It just installs, and I'll show you how it runs here in a minute. And I don't have a separate database like I do with Composer. Everything is maintained in vCenter, so I have a single point to go for truth about what's going on with instant clones, so I don't get any out of sync issues, so it makes it a little more kind of stateless. New desktops, and kind of this is like the recompose operation. Recompose might take hours to happen. It's going to take minutes with instant clones. I could do an end-to-end push of 1,000 desktops in 40 minutes or less, to be honest. Lower I/O load and a lot less vCenter calls. I don't remember if I have the slide in here or not about the vCenter call, so I'll table that until I see if the slides are. Yeah, it is. Okay. So we make 3 kinds of calls when we do a cloning operation: the clone itself, power cycles, and reconfigurations. If you look at the side-by-side, we're doing no power cycle calls with an instant clone, as opposed to 2 or more with link clones, and no reconfiguration happens. So there's a higher load. The instant clone process, because it's part of vSphere, it's part of vCenter, potentially puts a higher load on the vCenter itself, but the overall load for doing this is much lower because I'm not going through those power cycles, I'm not going through those reconfigurations, so it's overall a much lower load on vCenter. So it works much quicker and much more efficiently than link clones do. So great, this sounds awesome. Why don't I get rid of all those link clones? Well, there's a couple of limitations here in the first release, right? So let's talk about some of those. No dedicated desktop pools, but honestly, if you're setting up a persistent floating pool, that may not be an issue. There may be some use cases where it is an issue, like if you got to preserve a MAC address or you just have to have a dedicated desktop name for some specific reason. You're not going to be able to do that with an instant clone pool, at least for right now. And again, I'm talking about today. As we progress this technology, these things will change over time, but that's it today. We're not doing RDS or desktop or application pools right now, so to build those farms, you still need to use Composer. Limited SVGA support. There's no 3D rendering. So if it's a GPU use case, you really can't use instant clones right now. Again, short-term limitation. We've also fixed the resolution. So the max resolution is fixed at 2560 by 1600. Now, obviously, if you got a client that's using less resolution, the protocol will dumb that down, right? Or, bring that down. But that's the max resolution and max of 2 monitors. Right now, we have a platform limitation on the vSphere side where we can't change that on the fly. So you have to just, that's the way it's set. In fact, when you go into the dialog to set up the pool, it's grayed out. You can't even change it. But For a lot of use cases, that'll work. And then no sysprep support, right? We're just using clone prep. So if you have one of those corner cases where you have to have a different SID, you can't use sysprep. There's a couple other limitations, but I'll just kind of talk about those as being kind of the big ones. From architecture standpoint, again, it installs with a connection server. It's Java running on the Tomcat server, so you don't even really know it goes in. It'll go on every connection server you installed. One connection server will own the process at any given time, and it's a federated task, so if that connection server happens to go down, that process will get shipped over to another connection server. And I got some slides at the end about what failure scenarios look like and what the recovery is. Again, as I mentioned, no database, so everything is in vCenter. So installation, the only thing you have to be cognizant of in installation is when you configure the agent. So you can either select View Composer link clones or instant clones, not both. So if you're using a desktop template and you need to use it for linked clones and instant clones, you're probably going to have to maintain two different template trees in order to manage that, because you don't want to be uninstalling and reinstalling the agent all the time. It's just kind of clunky. So one or the other. So we added a new domain admin. This is kind of like where you went into when you set up vCenter in Horizon and you set up a domain account that would add the desktops to the domain. Same thing, we just have a separate spot to do it under the view configuration. So I can add admins for different domains, and it doesn't have to be an admin. It just has to have the rights to be able to add computers, delete computers, and write properties. And those are all documented with the specific rights. There's also a concurrent instant clone setting. So this is a new thing. You'll see it in there when you install. So by default, we set it to 20, kind of like we do with linked clones as well. So these are, the first time you use them, my reaction was, wow, there's a lot of objects there, a lot of folders, because we created a number of folders within, you'll see them in the vSphere client, and we write out a bunch of different objects to get to the end product, which is the desktop VMs. So just really quickly here, you start with the master VM, which is my gold image, right? And I'm gonna go through these each. It creates a template. From the template, we get a replica, which is my read-only disk. Then I fire up parent VMs on each host, and that's what is used to do the forking operation. So the new desktops get created off of those parent VMs. I'll go into this a little more in depth here in a minute. But this is kind of the hierarchy when you look at it, just so you understand what the heck's going on in vCenter. It's really only going to be very important if you get into a troubleshooting situation, and also just to be smarter than the other guy when you're talking about it. You know exactly what all these things are. The master VM is pretty straightforward. It's something we're really familiar with. It's the golden image, right? I build it, I optimize it, I snapshot it, I put my other agents on it, and it's ready to go to be my base image. I can have multiple snapshots off of that, just like I do with linked clones. The template is something new, and what I've got here in the slides is, this is kind of what it looks like in the data store, just so you get an idea. The template is a linked clone of the master VM. So it gets spun up and it'll get put on the same data store as the master VM. Whatever data store that's on will just get written on that. And because it's a linked clone, it doesn't use a lot of space. That's what it looks like in terms of the naming, cp template-GUID. And then it's going to be in this clone prep internal template folder. And I'll show you a screenshot of vCenter here in a minute. It's linked to the master VM for initially. Then the replica gets created. So this replica is really the same as a linked clone replica. It's that read-only disk that gets put on each data store. It gets thin provisioned, so it uses less total disk space. It uses the actual in-use disk space. So if I got a 60 gig VMDK, but I'm only using 20 gigs, that's what it's going to write out. It gets put in this clone prep replica VM folder, and it's my shared read for my desktop VMs. Just like a regular link clone replica. If you've got both, you'll see these are named with CP replica GUID, and the link clone ones are just replica GUID. So that's the kind of difference in terms of when you're looking at them and trying to figure out what they are. Then we create parents. So these parents VMs are what get what the desktop VMs get forked from. It's the running VM. So I put one per host per data store. So if I have 4 hosts and I'm using 2 data stores, I'm going to have 8 of these because I'm going to have one running on each host for each data store because it refers back to that replica as well, which is on a data store. So that's how the desktop VMs kind of figure out where they're going. And finally, we get the desktop VMs, the instant clones. And again, these are linked clones. They instantiate really rapidly because there's very little that has to get written to disk. I didn't mention this, but on the replica, we do put a digest on the replica, so it does use the content-based read cache. It's the only disk that'll use a content-based read cache with instant clones. It's really the only one that matters. Really small disk usage. They get deleted on Logoff. That's the default setting, and there's no way to change it right now. So as soon as the user logs off, it gets deleted. So that's going to kind of limit the overall growth, although if you're setting log-off policies, like disconnect log-off policies to be long periods of time and users can get back to those desktops, they can grow a little more. So growth is still something you need to kind of be cognizant of. But in general, these are going to grow less than standard link clones simply because on every log-off, they're gone and you get a new one. So this is kind of what it looks like in vCenter. I said I'd show it to you in vCenter. I got my master VM, which I can stick in whatever folder I want. The template is going to go in a template folder. The replica is going to go in a replica folder. The parent goes in a parent folder, and then my VMs are going to go in whatever folder I want to put them in. This looks nice and clean because it represents one image for one pool. When you've got, 20 pools and 5 different images, you're going to get a long list of each one of these, right? But they will be in these folders. I was having a conversation with a colleague about, sort of my anal retentive, I want everything perfect folders and then, all of a sudden I got these extra 4 folders here that I don't know what to do with. I just have to close them to get them out of my mind. So, but that's what those folders will be. You'll see them when you start to use this. So provisioning. So again, as I mentioned, floating pools only. So you'll set an automatic pool up. It'll be a floating pool. If you check anything else but that, when you get to this screen, you're going to see instant clones grayed out. So you just got to go back to you've got an automated floating pool so that instant clones are now an option. And this is just the wizard that I do pool provisioning with. I mentioned the fact that you could do elastic settings. So we've had these settings here for a while, the maximum, minimum, spare. But in practice, you really couldn't spin those up quickly enough to manage, I'm going to have a bunch of users logging in. You can now. So you can set a pool up if you want to. In this example, I got a maximum of 100. I got 10 spares, and I got 20 that are always going to be provisioned up front. So what's going to happen is I'm going to provision the 20 VMs, and then users are going to start to log in. As soon as my 21st user logs in, I've now violated my 10 spares because I only have 9 spares, so I'm just going to fire up another VM. And I'm going to keep doing that until I have 100. Now, if I fall below the minimum in the spares, I'm just going to delete those VMs because they get deleted on logoff and they're going to expand and contract pretty rapidly. And again, when you're at this point in the process, it literally takes 5 seconds for a VM to be ready, and we can do multiples at the same time. So it's very quick. Gosh, it's really light, but you can't see that rectangle is around the 3D settings, which are grayed out. So imagine, if you will, that there are 3D settings there. So I can't use this for 3D pools right now. So that's not an option today. We'll get there. So it's one of those use cases where if you're doing 3D pools, you're probably going to have to stick with either link clones or dedicated desktops, or full clones. From a storage standpoint, we support VMFS, vSAN, NFS, all out of the box. We don't support, if you're doing vVol or VAI NFS snapshots, we don't support those today. I can also do a tiered setup. So if I want to put my replica on the separate data store, like we've been able to do for ages, I can do that with instant clones as well. So I can stick my replicas on a high-speed data store and then put my desktops on another data store. No local storage, so it's got to be shared storage. So I'm not going to belabor this thing, but this is a pool creation. What I want to call out here is there's kind of two pieces to the pool creation process. There's a publishing and there's a pushing. So the publishing, or what we call priming sometimes, is really getting all of those internal VMs created. So getting the template created, getting the replicas created, getting those parent VMs created. All that happens every time I want to create a new image. So when I say an image, think of master VM plus snapshot. So snapshot A, snapshot B, snapshot C all represent 3 different images that I could potentially be using for pools. That part of the process, in every bit of testing that I've done, takes me about 20 minutes. And that's on, 4 servers on a single data store. And that's kind of what we're seeing in testing. Your mileage may vary. It may, if you're using a really nice all-flash array, it may take, 8 minutes. But that happens before I actually create the desktops. When we say it takes a second to fork or 5 seconds to get it ready, what we're really talking about is now we've said the image is ready to be pushed to the users. So in practice, the way this will probably work is you'll say, I'm going to create a new pool, and I want the users to get the image at midnight, let's say. And I'm doing this at noon, right? So I'm getting my publishing done. So all of this green stuff happens in the background before you're ready to actually push the new image to the users anyway. So just to kind of keep in mind, there's a priming process that happens, and then once that image is published, they're ready to create the desktops, and it's really very fast. I can tell you that I spent 2 weeks beating this thing up in my lab and trying all kinds of things, and I didn't actually break it once. So it's pretty impressive in terms of its speed to be able to create pools and its resiliency. Once I've done that, once I push desktops, in terms of placement, the instant clone engine is going to stick those desktops wherever it wants in terms of hosts. It's going to make the decision about that. Once that happens, DRS can kick in and move those desktops around. So DRS fully supported, vMotion fully supported, HA supported. Really no reason for storage vMotion. It might work. It's not something we tested, but since we're deleting the desktops on Logoff anyway, you would just set up another data store in the pool and let it go ahead and create the new desktops, because the image is already pushed, so priming it out isn't too bad.
Is that vMotion supported or no vMotion?
vMotion is supported and no storage vMotion. Okay. So vMotion supported, no storage vMotion. I can see the status of what's going on. Like this screenshot shows me that I'm now publishing my initial image. So this is that green process in that last slide. I'm publishing that image out. I'm getting things ready to have that desktop pushed. Everything's timestamped. So if you need to kind of troubleshoot this, everything's timestamped in the logs. When I'm ready to push the image, I can schedule that process. So the push image process can be scheduled, it can be rescheduled, it can be canceled. I can schedule it for a future time, and then if I want to pull it back in, and I was going to do it at midnight, but everybody's gone, so now I'm going to do it at 6 p.m. I can reschedule it and push it back in if I want to, or push it out. Again, I can select it for future time. I can force log off. I can wait for users to log off. Same kind of things we could do with recompose, for example. And then this is an example of, I have an image that's out there. You can see at the top there, it's a published image. And at the bottom, I'm publishing a new image. So this is like an update, right? So right now, I have an image that's published, and all my 1,000 desktops are running on that image. What I'm doing is I'm pushing an update to that image. So I'm in the process of publishing that. Until that image becomes published and the time gets hit that I selected to push it, the desktops will continue using that current image. Once it gets to be the time to push it, that pending image becomes the current image, and all my new desktops are going to get that. So that's kind of that rolling update. I can have 2 images published at the same time and then flip to the new one. And I can see when I'm looking at when I'm actually in the middle of a push operation, I can see the list of desktops in the pool in the inventory, and I can customize columns there to show the current image and the pending image, so that as the image is getting pushed out, I can kind of checkpoint how many desktops are on the old image, how many are on the new image. There's another way to look at that as well here. Yeah, so this is just showing, I have no pending images in that screenshot, but it shows which desktops are running on the current image, which is running on the pending image. And then I also can go into the Tasks tab, and I can see a total. So the large square is showing me I'm pushing out, in this case, a total of 1, but let's say it's a total of 100 desktops. And in that remaining column, what I see is how many are left to go. So that number is going to change. I have 100 total that I'm pushing out, and remaining might be 50. That lets me know I'm halfway through that operation. I include this because I think it's important to know where you're at in that process, but honestly, this process happens pretty quick. If you've got a small pool of 50 desktops, by the time you click over to that task tabs, that's going to be cleared. And those desktops are going to be coming up and available. I mean, it's really fast. I had to start using bigger and bigger pools to even go look at it. This is just kind of talking about the ability to reschedule and cancel those images. If you cancel one, what will happen is, if it's in the middle of pushing, it'll finish pushing, and then it'll go back and delete everything. Yeah, so this is the cleanup at the end. So notice at the top, I'm showing image unpublishing. That's in my current image, and pending image is now published. So what happens is, when I go from image A to image B, if no other pool is using image A, we realize that and say, okay, we can get rid of this. So then I'm going to get rid of those running parent VMs. I'm going to get rid of the replica. I'm going to get rid of the template, and it's just going to clean itself up. In Horizon, it won't touch your master VM. Your master VM is kind of off on its own, just like it is in link clones. It works a little differently in Horizon Air hybrid mode, because the desktop, the master VM, becomes a first-class image, so it's a little bit different there. Yeah, and then the new image gets displayed as that. Once that unpublishing process happens, the new image gets displayed as a current image, and you're on that new image. It's the only image that's there. I can delete pools. Obviously, I can do those at any time. Horizon 7 has a new feature. Chad, you're going to like this because you were one of the customers that ran into this problem. I can turn on the ability to make people think about deleting a pool. So what happens is, if I turn this on, I have to go delete the desktops. I've got to undo provisioning. I have to turn provisioning off, and then I can delete the pool. So you can't just do what happened to you at 3 a.m. from India that one time, and they just deleted the whole pool. So that's just a thing you can change in LDAP to turn that on, and instant clones are integrated with that. So that's part of Horizon 7, so upgrade. A recover is a lot like a reset with linked clones, only we don't just reset to a snapshot, we delete the VM and recreate it, because again, we can do that in a couple of seconds. So the recover operation is a lot like just putting it back. So if you got some errored out desktop, although generally speaking, when I've seen errored out desktops, we notice those and we just go and delete them and create new ones. One thing I see, remember I said that that process is really fast. Sometimes I'll see the desktops get created and go through their customizing process. And you'll see some in the customizing state, some in the available state, and one or two might sit in an errored state. And by the time you reach up to do a refresh, the ones in the error state have cleared. I think it's just kind of a timing thing with Active Directory, but it kind of self-heals in that regard. Clone prep. Probably get sued by Disney for using that graphic. So clone prep is the customization process. Again, doesn't require a reboot. It's going to change the machine name, change the machine password, do the domain join, do the license activation. No power operations required, and happens in about 1.5 seconds. I mean, it's really impressive. So just a couple things on troubleshooting. This is where the logs are. So just kind of documenting that the logs are the standard broker logs. They're in the the standard location in program data, VMware VIDM logs. So if you're familiar, or VDM logs, I should say. So if you're familiar with that, those are the locations. Those are a couple things you can search on to find things related to Instant Clone, NGVC, that's that Next Generation View Composer, pending operation, request ID. And then if you've got your date and timestamp from when you started, this is kind of a good place to go to troubleshoot what might be going wrong. Generally speaking, you're potentially on the phone with support if something's going wrong anyway. So, but knowing where the logs are helpful. Maintenance mode. So the parent VM will stay powered on and will not evacuate off the host, and so you can't get the host in maintenance mode. So we got a way to do that. Down here in the annotations section, there is a setting called instant clone maintenance. And you basically just go in there, there's no number in there, you change the number to 1, a couple minutes later it changes the number to 2 on its own, it gets rid of those parent VMs, and then you can bring it into maintenance mode. When you come back out of it, you just make sure that field is clear, and then the parent VMs will come back up and other VMs can be migrated back on. So just something that you need to know in terms of putting a host with instant clones into maintenance mode. So what happens when things break? If I get a host fail, provided I have the headroom, because I did a good design, because I'm smart like that, my desktops will come up. They'll basically, that parent VM will come up, and then the individual instant clones will come up on that failed host. So HA is supported with instant clones. One little glitch you might see is for a couple seconds, couple minutes, those desktops may still show as available in Horizon Administrator, and users may try to log in and not get a VM. Probably the pool's big enough that you have the ability to have enough headroom in there, because it's a really short window. Eventually we'll clear that up as the new VMs come and register. The instant clone engine will power on the parents if somehow they get powered off. You can't power them off on your own. They're a protected item within vSphere. So if you're in the vSphere client, you're attached to vCenter, you can't do power operations on those parent VMs. You can't delete the replicas. They're protected. There's a way to unprotect them, but I'm not going to tell you about that. If a connection server fails, now remember that the connection server is running the instant clone engine, so it's kind of the command central for getting this done. If one goes down and I'm in the middle of creating or deleting instant clones, so I'm in the middle of an image push, what will happen is another server in the cluster will take over, right? So it'll take over the operation. It may take a couple minutes for that to happen because a federated task has to kick in and say, hey, I just died here. If the administrator has stopped provisioning on error set, they'll have to go in and re-enable provisioning. If they don't, what will happen is the pool will error out, but eventually it'll just recover on its own. And then if I'm in the middle of an initial publish or push, that task will move, but it's not going to pick up. I'll have to go in and I'll actually have to re-enable provisioning, or I'll have to start a new operation to be able to fix that. Okay, that was a little more of a technical deep dive on instant clones. Questions? Nobody? I'm just that good? All right, well, I guess the big call to action here is I would definitely encourage you, especially if you've got a lab environment, that you can spin up Horizon 7 as you're going to start to take a look at this and a lot of the other features. I would definitely start working with instant clones. I was able to, and I'm just being honest here, I was able to get it up and running without having to look at a single piece of documentation and get a pool up within just a few minutes. Now, I've been doing this for a while, but I imagine a few of you have too. So there was not a lot of configuration that I had to go through to make it work. Like I said, pretty impressed by how quick it is and how resilient it seems to be. So, yeah.
So when you were spinning up, say, 100, 200 instant clones, I assume that the I/O impact is a lot more reduced than, say, if you spun up 100 link clones? Yeah,
it should definitely be. I didn't measure anything. I wasn't kind of doing reference work at this point, so I didn't take a real close look at that. But in general, yes, because there's a lot less going on now. Writing out the replica is going to be the same, but when you're spinning up the link clones themselves, there's no power operations really going on. You'll see it say power up in the vCenter client, but what's really happened is it's basically just coming out of that quiesce state. So I'm not doing a boot. And once that power up happens, it's there. So then I just run through the customization process, which has, very little disk impact. So yeah, I'm not as worried now about the sort of, provisioning storm we used to think about, even with link clones, because it's a lot lower. And again, you can stage that publishing process for a different time during the day so that it kind of happens in the background before you're even ready to push the desktops out to the users.
Jim, if I can add to that, on the EUC blog a couple of weeks ago, Fred Schimsheimer from my team did a blog post about the impact of instant clone versus traditional View Composer. And we kind of showed provisioning time, we showed the push time, we showed the CPU impact, the disk I/O impact. So there's a lot of data already kind of published on this. It was still based on early code. It wasn't quite GA code at that stage, but it gives you some kind of frame of reference on what the differences are.
Yeah, I got to say, I've been going through all of the link clone sort of wrestling for the last few years, and link clones are great. Don't get me wrong. It was a great. This is really a really geometric step up in terms of what we can do here. So, any other questions? Well, Chad.
For all the new sysprepping type technology, is there any concerns around not changing the SID?
Well, other than those, so we added sysprep support, I don't know, a few years ago, because when we first had link clones, we only did quick prep. And then we ran into some corner cases for particular pieces of software that wouldn't work without having a different SID. But I think SID technology, at least that particular SID, is kind of behind us for the most part. So I don't, I put it up there because I know people will have those corner cases still, because I know I worked with a lot of healthcare that have, applications that they've been using for the last 10 years that maybe have some specific requirements. But generally speaking, no, it's not an issue. Now you call Microsoft and you're saying you're not using sysprep, you're going to get a different story, but they only support sysprep. We support this. Any other questions? Oh, yeah, sorry.
So the clone prep, is there a way to run pre?
Yes, the pre and post scripts are still in there, so you can still slot those in. So when you get to that point in the process, it's in the last screen when you're basically selecting the account that you're using to add to the domain, you can pop those scripts in there. So if those scripts are existing on the master, yeah, they'll still run. Yeah. So you can do some stuff with that as well if you're trying to maintain a customization or something.
Can you recall if there was allow the reuse of the computer objects?
No, that was another one of the, I don't know what happened to my second slide. I had 2 slides in this deck that shows some of the other limitations. You cannot reuse a computer object. So if you have a situation where, and I run into this a lot, like government contractors and stuff, where 3 people in the entire company have Active Directory administrative rights, so somebody has to go in and pre-populate the accounts, the computer accounts, you can't use that with instant clones right now. So you still need to use link clones for that. And there's no manual naming, only pattern naming right now. So that kind of ties into that. Now, will that change in the future? Probably.
Ability to do a day 2 operation to clean up AD?
To remove computer accounts?
Yeah, as they're deleted from.
Yeah, you should be able to do that. I don't see why not. Because we're actually creating the accounts back again. So every time you do a pool, and when the machine gets deleted, we'll yank them out and then we'll put in a new one to replace it. Anything else? All right. Well, thanks for your time. Hopefully this was informative. I'll be around till the end of the event.